The city slept, but the shadows remembered. Streets gleamed under flickering lights, hiding secrets too dark to speak aloud. Somewhere in the silence, injustice moved like a predator, quiet, patient, invisible. Lives were measured not by their worth, but by the color of their skin. Tonight, the invisible cracks would fracture. Hidden truths, buried beneath polite smiles and polite nods, were ready to surface. Every glance, every whisper, every unnoticed moment had been leading here. And when the silence broke, nothing would be the same. Hit subscribe, watch till the end. The morning mist clung to the streets like a warning, blurring the edges of a city that prided itself on order and civility. Buildings rose like silent witnesses, their windows reflecting lives carefully curated to appear normal, controlled, untouchable. Yet beneath the polished facades, the air carried the weight of stories no one dared speak aloud. Stories marked by lines drawn invisibly across skin, by opportunities denied quietly, by voices silenced in broad daylight. She moved through this world with caution, each step measured, each glance calculated. Not out of fear alone, but from knowing the cost of being seen too clearly, of standing too tall, of daring to claim space in places where space was not hers to claim. Every sidewalk held echoes of confrontations past, every glance a subtle reminder that in this city, freedom was conditional, respect transactional, and injustice often cloaked in civility. The neighborhood around her apartment reflected contradictions. Lawns meticulously trimmed, yet fences kept neighbors apart more than safety. Cars polished to a mirror shine sat beside cracked driveways. Kids laughed in playgrounds that were carefully monitored, carefully segregated, while unseen histories lingered in the shadows of the brick walls and alleyways. Here, appearances mattered more than truth, and ignorance often wore the mask of fairness. She had lived long enough to understand the rhythm of this invisible oppression, the pauses in conversation, the unspoken judgments, the small but constant nudges that reminded her she was always other. And yet, despite the city's quiet hostility, there were spaces where resilience had taken root, where courage could grow unnoticed, like weeds through the cracks of a forgotten street. And today, the air felt different. A tension threaded through the ordinary, subtle and unsettling, like the pause before a storm breaks. Something was coming, something that would push against the careful facades, something that would expose the fractures everyone tried to ignore. Every shadow seemed to hold a story, every corner whispered a warning, and she felt it in the ache of her chest. The city was about to confront truths it had long buried, and she would be at the center, whether she wanted it or not. The city's calm was a fragile illusion, a thin veneer stretched over centuries of unspoken truths. She felt it in the rhythm of footsteps on the pavement, in the subtle shift of glances when she entered a room, in the quiet exclusions that spoke louder than any words. Every day the patterns repeated, opportunities passed over, voices ignored, spaces denied. And yet, the city went on, proud of its order, blind to the fractures beneath. Each morning, she watched the world as though it were a fragile glass sculpture, beautiful but easy to shatter. She noticed the little injustices that others missed, the clerk who lingered a moment too long before serving her, the neighbors who smiled but never truly saw her, the policies that claimed fairness but delivered inequality. These moments stacked like stones, invisible to everyone else, yet heavy enough to bend her shoulders. But something had shifted. A subtle tension hung in the air, a sense that the equilibrium was no longer stable. She observed the meetings, the casual remarks, the bureaucratic nods that dismissed her presence. In each microaggression, in each overlooked contribution, a story of injustice unfolded, one that had been written into the city's history, ignored but never erased. She began to map it all mentally, noting patterns, tracing lines from past to present, understanding how oppression had been structured so carefully that even its victims sometimes questioned reality. Her awareness grew into vigilance. She moved through the streets with intent, watching the way decisions were made, who was included, who was excluded. Each act of subtle bias, each whispered assumption, each unchallenged inequality added to the weight of what was coming. She began documenting, not for recognition, but for evidence, traces of the hidden violence that the city preferred to call normal. Tension escalated when her work collided with those in power. They did not see her as a person, only as a disruption. Policies were enforced with cold precision, designed to maintain appearances, to ensure that order was preserved at the expense of truth. Every obstacle she faced, every door closed in her face, strengthened her resolve. She realized that justice would not be given, it had to be seized. And yet, she remained unseen. To the world, she was ordinary, compliant, a part of the background. But behind this carefully maintained invisibility, she was preparing. Each slight, each dismissal, each instance of prejudice was a thread woven into the tapestry of her plan. The city believed it controlled the narrative, but the undercurrent of resistance was growing, and the cracks in their constructed order were widening. By night, she walked streets that seemed familiar but had changed subtly, almost imperceptibly, reflecting the city's indifference and hidden malice. Every alley, every neglected corner, every unremarkable streetlight became a marker of the inequality that festered beneath the surface. And as she walked, she could feel the tension building, a quiet pressure that threatened to erupt, a storm of accountability that would not be ignored. The sense of impending confrontation was unavoidable. The world she had navigated so cautiously, the city she had observed so meticulously, was on the brink. She could feel it in every heartbeat, every breath, every pulse of the night. The stakes had escalated beyond daily indignities, they had become a reckoning. And in the shadows she waited patient, knowing that the moment of exposure was near, that the invisible lines would finally be drawn into stark relief. Injustice had thrived for too long, hidden beneath the city's gleaming surfaces. But resilience, quiet and deliberate, had grown alongside it. And now, as the tension mounted, the hidden fractures of the world would be exposed, not in whispers, but in undeniable truth. The rising storm was inevitable, and she stood at its center, ready to witness the collapse of the illusions that had held power for generations. The night had settled like a weight over the city, dense and suffocating. Every street seemed narrower, every shadow darker, every passing figure a reminder of the invisible barriers she had lived with for so long. The tension that had been building for weeks, months, even years, had become unbearable, a pressure that could no longer be contained. Every injustice, every slight, every ignored cry for recognition had converged into a moment that demanded confrontation. The events that had seemed isolated, insignificant at the time, now aligned like dominoes, ready to fall. Policies, decisions, and casual dismissals, each one carefully designed to maintain a fragile order, suddenly felt like chains around the neck of the city itself. The weight of generations of hidden prejudice, of lives undervalued, of truth suppressed, pressed down on every corner, every building, every street. It was no longer abstract. It was imminent, tangible, unstoppable. She moved through the city not with fear, but with a clarity born of necessity. Every obstacle that had once intimidated her now seemed minor compared to the magnitude of what was unfolding. The people who had wielded power so casually, who had assumed control over what could be said and done, now faced the consequences of their indifference. Each carefully constructed barrier crumbled under the weight of revealed truth, each facade cracked under the force of exposure. The culmination was unavoidable. As she reached the center of the city, the convergence of hidden injustices became visible in a cascade of consequences. Reputations shattered, hypocrisies exposed, systems designed to silence now laid bare. The city could no longer ignore what had been happening in plain sight for decades. The very ground seemed to vibrate with the force of revelation, the heartbeat of collective accountability thundering through the streets. It was chaotic yet precise, violent yet controlled, destructive yet revealing. Every act of discrimination that had been tolerated, every subtle bias that had gone unchallenged, now collided with the weight of undeniable truth. The world she had navigated carefully, the networks of control she had understood and endured, were unraveling around her. And in this unraveling, there was a clarity that had been absent for generations. Injustice could not survive the light of exposure. In that moment, she felt the full force of what had been building inside her and around her for years. It was as though the city itself had held its breath, waiting for the collapse of pretense, the unveiling of the hidden fractures that no one wanted to acknowledge. And when the silence broke, it was deafening, not in sound, but in consequence. Every act of ignorance, every policy of exclusion, every unspoken assumption bore witness to its own undoing. She did not revel in chaos. She had no need for vengeance. The power lay not in destruction, but in revelation. And as the city reeled from the weight of its truths, the culmination of hidden prejudice and quiet suffering became a testament to endurance, resilience, and the unstoppable force of accountability. Every shadow that had once concealed injustice now trembled in the light of exposure. Every step, every glance, every unacknowledged moment had led to this point. And in the heart of the city, the truth had claimed its place, unflinching, undeniable, and transformative. The climax was not just a confrontation, it was a reckoning. The city breathed differently now, its rhythm forever altered. The fractures that had been ignored, suppressed, or disguised for generations, were finally visible, undeniable, and raw. Silence no longer protected the indifferent. The hidden currents of prejudice had surfaced, demanding acknowledgement. In the aftermath of revelation, the streets carried the weight of both reckoning and possibility. She walked among the remnants of the world as it had been, some shattered, some shaken, some beginning to rebuild. There was no celebration, only the quiet satisfaction that truth had claimed its place. The invisible barriers that had dictated lives for so long were now exposed, their power diminished not by anger or revenge, but by awareness and persistence. Every overlooked act of courage, every suppressed voice, every unrecorded story had contributed to this moment of transformation. Communities began to shift, hesitantly at first, then with more resolve. Systems that once silenced were confronted with accountability. People who had ignored inequality now faced undeniable evidence of the harm their inaction had caused. And in these moments, the possibility of genuine change emerged, not a superficial compliance, but a reckoning that demanded reflection, empathy, and action. She did not need acknowledgement. The impact lay in the ripple effect of her perseverance, the revelation that endurance and clarity could dismantle centuries of hidden oppression. The world would remember this, not as chaos, but as clarity. Not as punishment, but as awakening. And though the scars of injustice remained, the path forward was now illuminated, however faintly, by the truth finally spoken and seen. In the end, it was a question that lingered in every mind that witnessed it. How long would we allow silence and complicity to dictate the lives of those who simply seek recognition, fairness, and humanity? The city would never be the same, and perhaps finally, it was a city capable of being just.